Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Press Play Lifestyle Inspired podcast, where we do interviews with interesting and inspiring people to help you, our listeners, find the resources, tools, and support you need to be your best inspired self. We're super lucky today because we have a returning guest. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing well, Jackie. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. So, of course, I had to have you back. You're a busy guy. You've written another book since we talked last. This time, a novel. So, I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about, what's going on in your novel and maybe the reason that you started putting it together.
Thanks. Well, um, this was kind of a different writing experience for me than most of the books and articles I've written in the past. It's fiction, and most of what I've written is nonfiction. Um, I had written two novels before, so it's not entirely new territory, but I was just watching the news when the demonstrations following the George Floyd murder occurred, and I had this just incredibly impactful flashback to experiences of my own um, back in the early 70s. I was involved in some couple demonstrations that turned into violent riots. And in one of them, which was down in New Orleans, um, it was it became violent because a small group of anarchist revolutionaries incited the crowd to start acting out, and eventually police were called, and then it turned into a battle between the cops and the demonstrators. And I got to know this one anarchist a little bit just by talking to him that evening before the demonstration became violent, and he told me that his band of anarchists traveled around the country. And back in the late 60s and early 70s, there were demonstrations and protests going on constantly because of the Vietnam War and civil rights. And their purpose was to turn peaceful demonstrations violent. And I don't know what their success rate was, but in this case in New Orleans, it was successful. And so the images I saw on TV of how the demonstrations in Minneapolis turned violent and then spread to other cities, and in most cases they started out peaceful, and in many cases became violent. It just, reminded me so much of that experience. And um, it inspired this vision for a book based on a character who was an anarchist revolutionary. And so he was like that guy that I met and talked to. And and then so the kernel of the idea just started with, what would it be like to have that as your vocation. And so I then just kind of developed this character, and he grew into a mature adult and left behind his youthful militant anarchism and became a successful businessman, married the boss's daughter. A love story develops, which at least I find rather touching, between this guy who is a militant anarchist and this heiress to a very successful um, industrial business. Um, and then he, at the age of 70 years old, and he is older than me, I want to make note here, um, he has the experience I had, sitting at home watching the protests turn violent. And by this time, his wife is dead, and he's all alone in his big mansion. Um, and it's during the pandemic, so he's locked in. He has no contact with the outside world, and he has a psychotic episode, um, because it's just sort of it's so powerful for him after he's left that behind so many years ago and really become a very different person, that his personality just collapses and regresses into, he thinks he is that young militant anarchist again. And then the climax of the first section of the book is what he does about it. I mean, he goes crazy, and he does something quite extreme, which I won't tell
Well,
because
don't spoil it for us, Jeff.
that would be a spoiler. But then the second uh, part of the book is a young woman ACLU attorney represents him, and then it becomes her story of what's she going to do with this very strange case of this 70-year-old conservative Republican businessman who is now in prison for what he did during a psychotic episode. And the government is determined not to let his case become public because it would be very embarrassing to the Trump administration. And so the book then becomes, to some extent, a critique of how the Trump administration has handled the pandemic, because lots of people experienced what the protagonist, whose name is Jack Blair, feeling like you're just going crazy during the shutdown, shut-in lockdown period that we went through, particularly if you really are all alone. And then it's also a critique of how the administration and Bill Barr, Attorney General Bill Barr's Justice Department, has responded to the demonstrations, calling out federal troops and really overreacting. And kind of the climax of that overreaction was on June 1st when President Trump ordered, well, Bill Barr, at President Trump's behest, ordered the peaceful demonstrators at Lafayette Square across from the White House cleared so that President Trump could walk out and have a picture taken of him standing in front of St. John's Church with a Bible. Um, and so that event is sort of a climactic point in the narrative of the book. And the young ACLU attorney is left to try to clean up a very big mess. And the Trump Barr administration is determined never to let what happened become public. So that's the story without too much in the way of spoilers.
Oh, that's a pretty good story, even without all of the like climaxes in there. So it's interesting that it was like a fiction novel, but there seems to be a lot of weaving in of the current events. Uh, was there some particular reason other than the really interesting like flashback that you had? So that's a great inspiration for a novel. But um, do you have some strong viewpoints that you were hoping to enlighten, even if it was through fiction, or is it not just a fiction book, but did you really want to go with it being more of a just a fiction fun book?
No, I really did want to make a political point too. And I think that art, whether it's literature, painting, theater, dance, whatever, has a very important place in politics and sort of the development and evolution of society and culture. So, because I'm a writer, I wanted to use that ability or that art form to try to make a political point while being entertaining and informative and to some extent humorous. Um, and just 3 years ago, I wrote a book following the 2016 campaign and election of President Trump. And this book was really, it was nonfiction, and it was intended to encourage people to just bring down the temperature, the really angry hostility that developed during the 2016 election. Um, and I thought that was an important task or mission, because I mean, I had friends who were talking about moving to Canada, and whether you voted for Trump or you voted for Clinton, whatever, the election was over and Trump won, and I thought it was important to try to have our civil society restored to civility. But the trouble, and I actually hosted a discussion forum on Facebook where I was able to bring pro-Trump, anti-Trump people together, and we actually had really interesting civil discussions about current topics on Facebook, and it worked. And the only rule was that you couldn't attack another participant. You could say what you wanted about Trump, Clinton, politicians, but you could not personally attack another participant. And you were encouraged to use facts, data, and logic to support any opinion that you expressed, and it worked very well. And that inspired a book, which was called "Polarized: The Case for Civility in the Time of Trump." And well, so now here we are, 2020, next election, and once again, we're very polarized. If anything, we're maybe even more polarized, if that's possible, than we were in 2016. And I place a great deal of blame for that on President Trump. Um, Sort of historically, the role of a new president, once an election is over and the president is won, is to try very hard to unify the country. Um, and maybe, not in policy, in terms of, you need to do what you think is right in terms of legislation and so forth, but at least in terms of rhetoric, the way you talk to the country, um, the way you talk to world leaders and other politicians, is to, you won. So be civil. And instead, Trump has been just the opposite. He's been antagonistic. He intentionally divides the country. He plays on racial hostility. He plays on gender hostility. And his political strategy, because it worked the last time around, is he thinks that he can win by really exciting the white, older, and especially male vote, what everybody is now calling his base. And he thinks that if he can turn out his base, and they're all enthusiastic, that he can win again. I hope he's wrong, because I very much would like to see our country return to some sense of civility, stability, and just not be so mean.
Yeah.
uh,
I used to have
and
bumper sticker.
pardon me.
So I used to have a bumper sticker that said like "mean people suck," and I feel like it's. I mean, I hate to just get on the bandwagon, but I feel like when your role model uses fake facts, or when your role model is antagonistic, And this is the person that everyone in the country is supposed to look to for how to behave as a leader, and then certainly as a leader in a crisis. And I hope people don't model it, is all I would say. It's I don't think it's healthy for long-term success of the country to purposefully divide us. I mean, wasn't there a quote by an historian at one site, like, together together we succeed and divided we fall, or some sort of quote of that nature? And that still holds true. I mean, we're going through a lot as a country. There's so much. I mean, the pandemic alone, and then the racial tensions are very high, the discrimination is very high, the politic problems are very high. It would be a nice leader probably would be better for a wounded country, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's some problems with electing somebody as old as Joe Biden is. That, but although he seems very healthy and really pretty fit, especially for a guy his age. So, I saw him the other day riding a bicycle and looking like a really fit bike rider. So, that's encouraging. Um, and even some of the things that the Trump administration has done in terms of policy, I agree with, and I mean, anybody who's in the stock market has certainly done well. Of course, we had the big crash, but it's recovered. Does the president deserve some credit for that? Yeah, probably some. Um, so if you just removed his personality and removed, his tweeting and the way he's behaved so strangely at times, chaotically, incompetently, and nasty, if you remove that, his presidency, I don't think it would be ranked as great, but it wouldn't be the worst, at least in my opinion. But you hear a lot of people say that he's the worst president ever. I don't know. I mean, how you can really rank that, but I do think in my lifetime, he is by far the meanest, nastiest person we've had as president. And Richard Nixon and LBJ were not were not exactly gentle puppies, but compared to Trump, they were. I mean, even Nixon, who was driven out of office, um, would often give speeches where he really tried to reach across the aisle and reconcile with Democrats and so forth. And I mean, I don't think we've, at least in my lifetime, and I think in modern history, we've had a president that so intentionally um, is is mean and nasty and divides the country, and for what apparently he thinks uh, are his own political purposes.
Yeah. I think that there's something to be said too for the contrast of, the president before him was quite a mild mannered, very
Mm.
slick guy, right? I think there is a internet meme that just struck me as very interesting, where you see Obama get out of a airplane and he's all slick and puts his jacket nice and just walks off like he's out of like a MTV kind of music video. And then Trump sort of like kind of fumbles and falls out of the plane. And just the contrast of the poise and almost gracefulness
Mm.
of Obama, and his mild manner, even his diction and his voice quality and the way he spoke, and the amount of room he took up, right? It was just a mild mannered individual. Is a really big contrast to, that the first few months of after Trump was elected. I just remember hearing all the horrible things he was saying about, recorded saying about women. Like, that's the contrast we have. So how do you not see like the one and then the other and go, whoa, this guy's quite something, considering what we had before that. But then there's a reason he was elected, though, right? I mean, clearly, what did people want that was so important that he was elected? Was it change? Was it more action? What was it that had this happen? Because if we don't want another personality like that in office, then we kind of need to address whatever it was that got him into office.
Yeah, well, 2 points. The first one is, yeah, I completely agree. And you gave a really neat description of Obama. I mean, I saw him that same way. And I have to admit, I was a little prejudiced in his favor from the beginning because he taught at the University of Chicago Law School, and my alma mater is the college at Chicago. But I liked him from the very beginning, and for exactly what you said. I mean, regardless of policy and political agenda, he's he's a peacemaker. Even when he was, pushing what was considered this very liberal, progressive agenda, healthcare, Obamacare, uh, although every other, you know, developed country has it. But even then, he tried very hard to reach across the aisle. I mean, he waited 2 years trying to get Republicans on board with Obamacare, and that's his personality, and it's in such a contrast with Trump, who is just so hostile and aggressive, and but and yeah, the physical difference also. Trump is just such a big schlumpy kind of a bear of a man, and Obama is svelte, and yeah, I mean he's well, he was a basketball player, and just has a grace about him. um, but the I also tend to want to be a peacemaker. And so, like I said, although I voted for Clinton, I thought it was important, and that's why I ran that Facebook discussion forum to try. I mean, we're all Americans. And so I worked very hard to understand why people voted for Trump. And so back, to your other point, what about all the people that voted for him, and why was that? And back when I was writing that first book, the polarized book, I what people articulated to me, because I interviewed, I think it was 27 or 29 Trump voters that are reflected in that book and what I learned from them. And there were three things that almost every single one of them said. One is, we either hate or distrust Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was just a lot of animosity towards her. Number two, we think the Democratic Party is pushing the country towards socialism, and we think that's bad for the country. And number three, we just don't want. We would like the country to go back to what it was like during the sort of the 1950s. There's this real sense of change is happening too rapidly. It's dangerous. We're sort of losing what America was supposed to be, which is represented in a lot of people's, well, at least white people who were middle class or better in the 1950s, which, it was a great time in the sense that the economy was doing well. Most everybody had jobs. Trouble is, if you weren't white, you couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. You couldn't get certain jobs. I mean, it it was discriminatory. And so it's like, in fact, my current book, the Anarchist Republican Assassin, addresses that, because the main character grew up with that small town, actually lived in a house with a white picket fence. And so, and then he rebels against that and rebels quite radically. But the other thing, we have to remember is the people that voted for Trump, which were, millions and millions of people, still 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton. I mean, Trump won the electoral vote, but he was 3 million votes, which is a lot of votes behind Clinton, despite the the animosity towards her, which I think part of is just pure sexism. I think every woman uh, is up against it to some extent. I mean, I remember I was at my YMCA during the campaign in 2016, sitting in the hot tub and just jawing with a couple other guys. And this one guy says, "Well, I could never vote for a woman." I said, "What do why not?" He said, "Well, because women were put on earth to serve men." So he said, you women should not be bosses. They shouldn't be in charge, except of the household. And I mean, I don't think by any means a majority of men in America believe that, but I think a significant minority do, just like I think a significant minority of white people absolutely do not want a person of color, a person that is not white, in charge. And Trump, very subtly at times, and other times just overtly, um, plays to that racism and sexism and fear of the foreigner. I mean, he started his campaign when he made his announcement on the elevator or the escalator there at Trump Towers. His opening campaign speech was a just xenophobic attack against Mexican immigrants. And, why did he do that? He did it because at that point, there were, thousands of Mexicans trying to get into the US, and lots of white people were very fearful and upset about that. And he very smartly uh, honed in on that, and that's how he started and that's really what launched his campaign, is that fear and xenophobia of white folks.
Yeah, so I think one of the big, I actually didn't vote for either of them. I did a write-in vote. And so I can imagine, like, so torn for me, it was like between which of the two meanies do you get to have? Like, which mean bully do you let be in charge of everything? And it didn't seem like, although some would say then you throw your vote away, but because one of them was going to win. But either way, I think there's some opportunity for us to think about, what do we want, who do we want leading our country, and how do we want, you know the next crisis maybe to be handled. I think my concern was we probably had the worst president that could ever be put in charge of a pandemic response. But maybe not. Like, were any of the others in charge of pandemics? I don't, So there's not really a lot of comparison, but I appreciate that you took that time to really weave in life into this fiction story, which I hope maybe makes it more accessible to others. Like, since it's fiction, they'll maybe read it and gives them an opportunity to have a different kind of thought than maybe if they're not really nonfiction readers. What are you hoping to get out of the response to your book?
Well, um, Jack, the main character, as a 70-year-old white guy who was CEO of a very successful business, was a conservative Republican who belonged to a country club and was it's set in my hometown of Indianapolis, and he's sort of well, he's a pillar of the community, the establishment. He's a very traditional Republican, and the what the point I'm trying to make artistically by choosing that character is if Trump's incompetent handling of the pandemic can drive a guy like this loony, uh, I mean, what does that say? And I mean, I'm biased in terms of how effective it is, but I think I make a very good case of how, uh, because of the really incompetent, chaotic handling of the pandemics and then of the demonstrations, a lot of us were feeling like, oh my God, the country's just gone crazy. And instead of trying to, make it more stable and reduce the tension, Trump was heightening it. I mean, you know, on June 1st, where the infection rate, the death rate of the pandemic is skyrocketing. Trump always talks about we're number one. Yeah, we're number one in deaths and infections. We are number one, and the the Black Lives Matter protests are escalating because of the whole nation watching this police officer murder a black man right there, slowly killing him. And we're all witnessing that. And so, what does Trump do? He clears the streets there had been some violence the day before, but on June 1st, there was no violence. He brutally clears them with tear gas, um, and batons and shields, and beat demonstrators who were not resisting so that he can have a picture of him taken holding a Bible. I mean, to me, this was like, there it is. This just sums up how ridiculous this man is as president. That instead of, you know, focusing on doing something to better manage the pandemic, which every other country has managed better than the US, and being out, talking to demonstrators and leaders of Black Lives Matter or leaders of the civil rights movement, how can we bring peace to the street? Instead, he sends stormtroopers out to beat protesters. And so, in a way, that's sort of like I cracked with that. It's kind of, sent me over. And I just felt, I want to do something about this. And of course, there's all the traditional political things you can do to try to get out the vote or work for a candidate. And I did a lot of that when I was younger. Um, and I'm leaving that up to younger people. So that they can, of course, I don't know if you can't really knock on doors now, but you can do all the kind of hardcore politicking, and I hope they're successful at it. But so as a writer, this is my effort.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate you coming back and taking the time to tell us what you were thinking with the book. And I know you've also written a lot of articles recently as well, like all along like healing that bridge between the divide in the country and the political parties. So where can people find more information about, I mean, you've written so many books, that where can people find you in case they have nothing to do sitting at home sheltering in place?
Yeah, you might as well read one of my books.
Might as well, right? What, that seems like a good idea.
Well, you can just type my name into Amazon, um, and Jeff, Rasley. I also have a website which has links to each book and articles and other activities I'm involved in. And it's my full name, Jeffrey, Jeffrey. Rasley website. So
All right.
thank you very much for having me back, Jackie. It's a joy each time we get to talk to each other.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll definitely put in the show notes, how to all the places that people can find you. And every time you write a book, let us know. We'd love to talk about it because then I have like the summary so I know when I can go read it.
Okay, great.
All
I
right.
will definitely let you know.
Have a great day, sir. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Namaste.
Namaste.